will be time for our first and second reading and sermon, which will be brought to us by Kerr. And so excited to be partnering with Kerr in ministry over the summer. And so we will, and there's we're just going to see how this works. And Kerr, if there's something that you need, let us know. And we're so grateful to be hearing from you this morning.
Thanks, Priscilla, and everyone. Let's see, it's going to be hard for me to see in the sanctuary, but maybe give me a wave from the sanctuary if you can hear my voice okay. I see some waves, fabulous. All right, we've got a lot of moving parts this morning because I'm also sort of supporting some text, so bear with me as we weave together technology and prayer. I want to start by lighting a candle, if that technology is willing. For me, candles can be a nice way to remember things we want to remember. And so today I light this candle to remember all of the ways that we connect in this community, across time, across space, across geography. Those of you in the sanctuary, those of you in the virtual sanctuary, we are all connected. For our first reading today, I'm going to do my level best to share a video of Padraig Otuama reading his beautiful poem called How to Be Alone. But before we do that, I want to just kind of arrive with you for a moment. And actually, I want to invite you to arrive with me. There's been a lot of goings on, especially for those of you in the sanctuary who have been leading and troubleshooting and singing and doing all the things. So I want to invite you right now just to take a moment to arrive or to re-arrive, whether you're in the sanctuary or in your home, to take a moment to breathe. And if you're thinking, well, Kerr, we were breathing, of course, I think you'll understand that I'm inviting you to breathe just a little, with a little more care, a little more intention. Just notice what it's like to breathe. The gift of breath, the gift of our own breath, the gift of God's breath in us. Perhaps if it feels helpful, noticing the surface you're sitting on, noticing where your feet make contact with the earth. Just noticing all of these things. There's nothing you need to change or to fix or to do. Just noticing what it's like to breathe and to be in this moment, in this place, noticing with curiosity and kindness. And then gently sort of bringing your attention to the people around you, whether those are the people on your screen or the people in the sanctuary or both. I'm so delighted to get to partner with Priscilla this summer in worship ministry, and really grateful for hers and Kip's invitation to help out while Kip is on sabbatical. It's a gift also to be able to do this with you from upstate New York. I'm joining you from Trumansburg today, which is just down the road from Ithaca in upstate New York. And as we gather on this glorious summer day, as Mary Oliver reminded us, I want to invite us today to go inward a little bit for our sermon, to take a bit of a journey inward and to slow down just a little and to see what it's like to deliberately slow down for a moment in worship, and to explore why or if that might be a helpful thing to do. But first, our first reading. This is, as I mentioned, a beautiful poem by Padraig Otuama, and I will tell you a little more later in the sermon how it came into my awareness, but for now I'm going to see if we can. Let's see here. Nope, that is not it. This is one of those tech moments, so bear with me as I get us set up. Okay. Let me try this again. I'm so sorry, friends. Bear with me. Here we go. All right, I'm going to play just a smidge of his intro so we can make sure this is working. And I'm going to ask, let's see, it's hard for me to see your faces. If you're on Zoom, I'm going to ask you to give me a thumbs up. And actually in the sanctuary, you can give me a big wave if this is working. And then we'll actually play it. Here we go.
Is in proportion to your capacity to belong safely.
I see the waves. I think it's fantastic. Okay, this is Padraig Otuoma coming to us presumably from Ireland, which is where he is, reading his poem, How to Be Alone.
And wisely and critically to yourself. So here's a poem called How to Be Alone. It all begins with knowing nothing lasts forever. So you might as well start packing now. In the meantime, practice being alive. There will be a party where you'll feel like nobody's paying you attention. And there will be a party where attention is all you'll get. What you need to do is to remember to talk to yourself between these parties. And again, there will be a day, a decade, where you won't fit in with your body, even though you're in the only body you're in. You need to control your habit of forgetting to breathe. Remember when you were younger and you practiced kissing on your arm? You were onto something then. Sometimes harm knows its own healing. Comfort knows its own intelligence. Kindness too. It needs no reason. There is a you telling you another story of you. Listen to her. Where do you feel anxiety in your body? The chest, the fist, the dream before waking, the head that feels like it's at the top of the swing, or the clutch of gut like falling and falling and falling and falling. It knows something. You're dying. Try to stay alive. For now, touch yourself. I'm serious. Touch yourself. Take your hand and place your hand someplace upon your body and listen to the community of madness that you are. You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here.
Thank you for joining me in that gift of poetry. I want to invite you to join me in receiving part of his invitation there. I want to invite you right now to pause with me. Whoops, bear with me here. A little bit of tech. There we go. Yes, I want to invite you right now to pause with me. And to, if it feels okay, or as much as it feels okay, to find a point of contact with your own body. For me, oftentimes it's a hand on the chest, maybe a hand on my belly. For you, it might be just simply clasping your hands in your lap, or a palm on your knee, or just noticing again your feet on the floor. But my invitation to you in this moment is to intentionally find a point of contact with your body. And I know we don't always talk about bodies in church, but I want to invite you to actually try this if you feel able to do so. To find that point of contact and to take a breath. And just to notice what you notice. We're going to return to that practice again in a little bit. But first, our second reading comes to us today from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6. And this is just a little excerpt. The apostles came back to Jesus and reported all that they had done and taught. Jesus said to them, "Come away by yourselves to some place more remote and rest a while." For there were many people coming and going, and the apostles hadn't had time to eat. So they went away in a boat to a deserted area. Again, as you're hearing these gospel words, finding that point of contact, a hand on the chest, a hand in a hand, a palm on the knee, your feet on the floor, finding that point of contact with your body and remembering to breathe. What do you notice? There is so much in these 3 short verses in the Gospel of Mark. The passage comes right after a whole lot of activity in this gospel. Jesus has returned to and then is dismissed by his hometown. He calls and he commissions his disciples. He sends them out with these very specific instructions about how to go out and teach and preach. And then meanwhile, Herod has taken the life of John the Baptist. Any of these could be a sermon in and of themselves. And then the apostles return to Jesus, telling him of all they've done and all they've taught. I imagine they had so many stories. I imagine the energy was high, that there was a lot to say. And Jesus's response, come away by yourselves to someplace more remote and rest a while. It's also worth noting that right after this moment, they do try to get away, but the crowd follows them. And eventually Jesus and the disciples, they, as you do, they feed 5,000 people instead. Yes, immediately following this excerpt is the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus and his disciples don't rest on their laurels. Indeed, the Gospel of Mark is full of action. I learned in seminary that Mark is the immediately gospel. The word immediately appears about 41 times in the Gospel of Mark, and this is a unique characteristic of the Gospel of Mark. Throughout this story, there is action, there's immediacy, there's urgency, there's work to be done. And yet, repeatedly throughout this immediately gospel, Jesus pauses. He takes time to step away, to seek solitude, to pray. I have to imagine that this little community is grieving. They've just lost their friend, John the Baptist. I imagine they are grieving his death. I imagine that perhaps they haven't even yet had time to process the reality of his violent murder. It's also interesting to me to note that the disciples haven't even had time to eat when Jesus calls them away. Come away by yourselves to someplace more remote and rest a while. I'll be honest with you. I am a meditator. I am a prayer. I love solitude and silence, but I imagine if I were one of the disciples, I might really struggle with this instruction. Come away, rest. Are you serious, Jesus? You just sent us out with these really clear instructions on what we should be teaching and doing in the world. You told us we need to get out there and do this work, and the work just keeps growing. There's so much need. There are so many things calling out for our attention. The world is on fire. We don't have time to step away and rest. Anything feeling familiar here to any of us in our current context? I invite you again to pause with me, to find a point of contact with your own body, a hand on the chest, a hand in the hand, a palm on the knee, your feet on the floor. For real, I really mean this. Find a point of contact with your body. And if you're feeling self-conscious about doing this in a visible way, then I invite you to bring your inner attention to that point of contact with your body and breathe. Remember to breathe. What do you notice? I have been spending prayer time each day with this beautiful little book by Naomi Ortiz, Sustaining Spirit, Self-Care for Social Justice. Ortiz talks about self-care in a deeply embodied way, in a way that honors her experience as an Indigenous Latina woman with a disability. She writes with deep honesty about the ways that she is relearning how to practice self-care in profound and often countercultural ways. In one chapter, she talks about the difference between what's urgent and what's important. I know she's not the first author to talk about this distinction, But there's something in the way that she explores it that feels particularly embodied and helpful to me. She reminds us that urgent and important are very often not the same thing, and that we may need to set aside what's urgent to attend to what's important. I invite you to hear that again. We may need to set aside what's urgent to attend to what's important. I don't know about you, but I get so easily swept up in the urgent. The world is, as we just said, on fire, and it has been for, well, for years now, maybe decades, maybe longer. Sometimes it feels like we are careening from one urgency to the next, not even getting the time to catch our breath, much less to get our bearings. Multiple emergencies, multiple losses, multiple griefs. How do we hold space for it all? Priscilla spoke last week about the extraordinary complexity of our human emotions, the deep joys and the equally deep griefs, and the invitation that she gave us to hold space, to allow space for it all in ourselves and in what we share with one another. For me, at least, this can be pretty challenging to do when the world is swirling, when there are so many immediate, there's that word again, and urgent demands calling our attention. What might it be like for us to step away from all that is swirling, to slow down, to rest, to pause, to breathe? I invite you right now to pause with me. You know it's coming now. Find a point of contact with your own body, a hand on the chest, a hand in a hand, a palm on a knee, your feet on the floor. Find a point of contact with your body and breathe. What do you notice? Last weekend, I attended my denominational conference with Metropolitan Community Churches. We meet every 3 years to worship and celebrate and reconnect and to conduct the business of our denomination. We're a global denomination, so it's complicated getting us all together. And for the first time, we met entirely online. It was a beautiful conference. We had churches and speakers from all over the world that were able to participate in new ways because we were meeting virtually because of COVID. There was so much to talk about. There was so much work to be done, so much to celebrate and discuss and then on the last afternoon of our conference, after most of it had already wrapped up, we had a final plenary session with Padraig Atuama, who you heard from today. And I know for me, my mind and my heart were still buzzing from all of this conference fullness and all of the things I needed to do and the action I needed to take. And he began, and it was a very similar visual to what we saw today. We saw him in presumably his little office in Ireland. He might even have been wearing the same shirt, and he read us that poem in this sweet and kind and gentle voice. And for me, amidst a conference with a lot of words and a lot of music and discussions and activism and visioning and theology and reconnecting, this simple poem offered a moment of slowing down, of remembering to pause, of remembering the gift of solitude, of stepping aside, of taking time to pause and to breathe and to rest. He says in his poem, touch yourself, take your hand and place your hand someplace upon your body and listen to the community of madness that you are. You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here. You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here. I invite you again to pause with me, to find that point of contact with your body, and to remember to breathe. What do you notice? You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here. What might it mean for us as a community to practice this, as Jesus invites us to take a moment to step away, to pause, to rest a while? What if we are called, as Naomi Ortiz offers, to set aside what is urgent to attend to what is important in our own souls? What if, as Padre Kotuoma suggests, there are deep gifts to be found when we take time with our own souls? And what if doing this is what's going to best allow us to attend to that which is urgent around us? I wonder if we might find together a touchstone that can help us to remember to step out of the swirl once in a while, a touchstone that can help us to remember what is important. I use the word touchstone deliberately as something that can remind us to pause, to slow down, to breathe. It doesn't always have to be a huge slowing down. It doesn't always have to be a lengthy pause, but I believe there is power in remembering to pause, in remembering to breathe. And so I want to invite you, as we move towards the end of this sermon, to engage in a gentle practice with me for just a couple of minutes. I'd like us together to find, each one of us individually, our own touchstone for pausing, for resting. So for one more time, I invite you, first of all, just to breathe. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, I invite you to try that. Sometimes just doing a soft gaze where you're kind of, I'm doing soft gaze right now, I'm kind of looking downward without making eye contact, so to speak. Whatever might feel good for you. And to just for a moment, as much as feels okay for you, to bring your attention inward. Once again, noticing your feet connecting with the earth, the surface that you're sitting on, this body that you're in, this beautiful, complicated, wonderful body that you're in. And if it feels possible, I invite you to find a point of contact with your body, either with a hand or just with the intention, with that internal focus. And to remember to breathe. And I invite you to see if there is a simple gesture that might serve as a touchstone for you. And I'm going to show you what I mean. For me, a gesture that helps me remember to slow down and to breathe is to sort of slow down this action of bringing my hand to my chest. And I'm also actually bringing my other hand to my belly, even though you can't see that. And there's something about this gesture for me that reminds me to breathe, that reminds me to slow down, that reminds me to attend to my own soul. So this is my gesture, bringing my two hands in. Your gesture can be really subtle. It could be as subtle as just a finger tap or a squeezing of the toes against the surface of the earth to remind yourself to feel the earth under your feet. But my invitation to you right now is to see if you can find that gesture, a simple gesture that can be a touchstone for you when your world is swirling, something that can help you to slow down, to pause, to breathe, and as Jesus invites, to rest a while. So take a moment with that gesture, perhaps repeat it a couple of times. I'm going to repeat mine a few times. And as you're repeating it, notice what it's like to think of this gesture as a touchstone for rest, for breath, for pause. And remember that because it's a touchstone, you can return to it at any moment that you need it. I invite you to explore, play with this touchstone in the days to come. Maybe to find a few moments in this coming week, maybe even one each day, where you can pause and rest and return to this touchstone, even if it's just for a moment. Let's come away with Jesus, with our beloveds, with our community, with ourselves. Let's rest a while. This is God's good news. Amen.